get these numbers to add up.
It's like we're never going to get out of this hole.
Credit card debt, does it ever end?
Maybe I can help. We sure could use it.
We've tried debt consolidation companies.
We've even taken out loans to help make payments.
Well, you're not the only ones. Did you know millions of Americans live with debt they cannot control? That's why I developed this unique new program for managing your debt. It's called Don't Buy Stuff You Cannot Afford.
Let me see that. If you don't have any money, you should not buy anything. Sounds interesting.
Sounds confusing.
I don't know, honey. This makes a lot of sense. There's a whole section here on how to buy expensive things using money you save.
Give me that. And where would you get this saved money?
I tell you where and how in Chapter 3.
Okay, well, what if I want something but I don't have any money?
You don't buy it.
Well, let's say I don't have enough money to buy something. Should I buy it anyway?
No.
Now I'm really confused.
It's a little confusing at first.
Well, what if you have the money? Can you buy something?
Yes.
Now take the money away. Same story?
Nope. You shouldn't buy stuff when you don't have the money.
I think I got it. I buy something I want, and then hope that I can pay for it, right?
No. You make sure you have money, then you buy it.
Oh, then you buy it. But shouldn't you buy it before you have the money?
No.
Why not?
It's in the book. It's only 1 page long. The advice is priceless, and the book is free.
Wow, I like the sound of that.
Yeah, we can put it on our credit card.
So get out of debt now. Write for your free copy of Don't Buy Stuff You Cannot Afford. And if you order now, you'll also receive Seriously, If You Don't Have the Money, Don't Buy It, along with a 12-month subscription to Stop Buying Stuff magazine. So order today.
Okay.
Okay, so we're going to move into a time of a little bit more practical application for some of the principles we've talked about, and we're going to start with just a few minutes on just basic budgeting. And I think what's really interesting about it is even people who are really good at financial things and financial vocabulary and understanding finances oftentimes I think are really bad at basic budgeting. So we want to talk about it because we think it's applicable to all of us here. I have a really funny story about my own journey with Tim on budgeting. A couple years ago he was taking his sabbatical, and one of the things we do here at Hope is for the pastors, they have to come up with a sabbatical plan, right? What are you going to do on your time off? And then you have to have your spouse sign off on this sabbatical plan. So the night before it's due, Tim comes to me with his sabbatical plan. He's like, oh yeah, honey, by the way, I have to do this plan and you have to sign off on it. And I look over it and I'm like, well, shouldn't we spend some time like getting on the same page for our finances? And he's like, we're on the same page. Like, whatever page you're on is the page I'm on. I'm like, no, we haven't been on the same page. We've been married, at the time we'd been married like 10 years. I'm like, honey, we're not on the same page. We really need to talk about this. So we ended up talking for about 3 hours about why we should do a budget together. And I didn't even, it was funny because every year before that I had done I love doing our taxes. It sounds stupid, but I do. And every year I'd be like, oh, honey, I did them. We should sit down. Let's review this together. He's like, no, where do I sign? Like, stop it. I hate this. So it was just this really funny process. But we ended up, so the good news was we ended up, this was a couple of years ago, we ended up developing this sort of system that works for us. And part of our message today is going to be there's lots of different tools that you can use, and the key is finding something that works for you to track where your money is going, to tell your money where it's going to go, and to feel intentional, proactive, and organized so that you're doing it in a way that we think is sort of just good stewardship, right? We use that in our ministry name. So the one thing that came out of the budgeting process with Tim and me, he's the spender, I'm the natural saver, right? So we have these different kind of personalities that we're coming at this from. But one of the things that he commented on as we kind of went through this a few times was, I'm really surprised at how this budget I thought it was going to be restrictive. I thought this was your way of getting me to spend less. Which, I mean, may have been a motivation at one point. But he's like, I'm just really surprised because whatever we agree on for the number, like like you're not coming at this from an agenda of like this has to be the number. But he's like, I'm just really surprised that now that we have this and it's predictable, I feel like a sense of freedom with it. Like I can spend this much on this and I don't feel like you're going to say to me, like, why did we spend this much on this category? It's because we planned it and we have it already and so we'll talk a little bit more about the different kinds of systems that you could use or how you find that in just a minute. But thought we would just kick it off by emphasizing sort of the need to get organized in this way.
Yeah, just one quick story on that too is when Becca and I first got married, I had been following a budget and she hadn't, and just talking through different things that we valued. And for me, it was like with grocery shopping, I always shopped at Aldi, spent like $20 a week, like just ate salads and sandwiches, and that was kind of the extent of what I ate. And for her, she loves to cook and she loves to make bigger meals. And so there was actually a time early in our marriage where she went to the grocery store and she actually like just broke down crying because she felt like she couldn't buy the things that she needed to. That was before we got a clearer budget in place. But then after we had that in place, it was actually freeing for her because now she felt confident. Like, Ben's not going to be second guessing the different things that I'm buying at the grocery store because I'm sticking within the budget that we've agreed upon together. And so
we actually, you guys probably know Tim likes to cook, and we actually had to move our entire entertainment budget into our food category because our grocery bill was so crazy. But it was fine because that was our entertainment, like that we were having people over and enjoying that. So one big important point in all of this too is that you're going to find as you start tracking what you spend your money on, you're going to find at the end of the day that it reflects your values, which is kind of a scary thing. And I think one reason why a lot of people may be hesitant to start getting organized in this area. I don't know if you want to comment on that at all, but
yeah, I think that that's a great thing. And I think at the end of the day, we're accountable really for every dollar that passes through our fingers. Like it's like you mentioned earlier, it's God who owns everything. We're the stewards of that money, and so we do have an accountability to how it's used, and we can make that become an idol where we're too carefully tracking every single penny and not enjoying what God has given to us. But really, like we are responsible for how we're spending that money.
Yeah. So Ben and I have taught the financial peace class before. There's a lot of emphasis in that class on how do you go about doing this. There's other places, websites, resources, and we'll talk about them in just a second here, that you can use to start getting organized in this way. But really thinking about it from the standpoint of using a zero-based budget. And we explain what that means by saying, okay, what's going to come in a given month for income. And our view is that you spend it all. And that doesn't mean you spend it all. It means that you allocate every dollar before it comes in on what your plan is for the money, and not just your plan, right? I guess what your and God's plan is as you rely on His guidance and His direction. But that you tell your dollars where they're going to go. And that actually can be really empowering from the standpoint of like accomplishing different goals that you have financially.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, so when we get to making a budget and setting up a system, we each have different experiences with things that work. I'm going to ask all of you. So part of your homework was to put together a budget. Again, I'm sure some of you had one, some of you probably didn't. Does anyone here in the room have an experience with a budgeting system that you really like? Do you want to name it?
Your guys's.
Our guys's?
The zero-based one with the envelopes and everything.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so
Okay.
Dave Ramsey's basically.
Yeah, the one
financial
you gave
peace
we did in the class.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome.
Because right before we got married, my wife and I went to the class.
You were in the class that was down here.
It was over in the other building.
Okay.
It was over in the other building.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
There's an online account called envelopes, like envelopes. It's similar, but it's automatic. It's digital. There's also one called Mint that's highly recommended.
So Mint, my experience with Mint, and it's been a few years since I logged on, is that it's an expense tracking system, right? So it's an account aggregator. You can pull in all your different accounts so that you have a balance sheet, and then you can also categorize the outflows so that you know where the spending is going. Kind of like a simpler and online version of Quicken.
Yeah. You can set up budgets as well, though, to be proactive and spend. But yeah, it's a free tool.
I use the Excel sheet that you gave me
Okay, awesome.
because it's really itemized.
Cool.
Anyone else?
I use everydollar.com. I think that's a Dave Ramsey
Yep.
tool.
Yeah. And it's an app too, right?
Yep.
Yes.
I think they have an app.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They do.
I benefited from something at Northwestern Mutual, a friend of mine.
Okay.
Offered to me. So, that's really
What do you guys, in your experience, for those of you who've started doing a budget or maybe tried at one point but aren't anymore, what have you found most challenging or confusing in the process?
I would say my month-to-month expenses widely vary. So like this guy right here who I live with is getting married, and all of a sudden he's like, "Hey, you need to buy this suit." I don't know where that fits in because my clothing the clothing that I buy, maybe if that's a category, or just like shopping, maybe more generically, is like $30 a month, and then it's like here's $200 or whatever, you know. So I don't know how to fit something like that in a lot of times, and there's a lot of instances where that comes up. Car repairs, like all these different things. It's just random spikes in different categories, and so I struggle with how to put those in something that makes sense on a monthly basis.
I think so. There's like two different thoughts that I've heard of, and my husband and I have tried them both. Where you budget for the month, like you budget for the month ahead. So and we tried to do one, and we tried to do the other, and I get really confused when it goes that way. Like all of your money is then in the bank when you budget it, or you budget it as it comes in, and so it gets very complicated as to how that timeline is set up and when that happens, and I think that that's been the most complicated and confusing thing for me, just to wrap my head around the time frame of what is going on. But
I have two thoughts on that might be helpful. So one is, Tim and I so I haven't paid a cent to a credit card company in interest, I don't think, in my adult life. Partly because I had an experience as a young adult with my family that was pretty scary financially around credit cards. So I was really sensitive to this. But we used credit cards for all of our monthly expenses just because it was easy for like the first 10 years we were married. So we just had our credit card and then we'd get our bill and we paid off the next month, right? And always paid it off in full, so we never carried a balance. But what it does is it means that you're spending, you're sort of like spending ahead of your income, right? And you have to, in order to catch up, you have to basically use some of your savings to actually catch up and have real-time expenses happening out of your bank account and those matching your income. So for us, one of the first things we did was we got rid of the credit card spending system. Tim was very sad to lose the perks, like the benefit points, but I'm like, you know what? So we went to a debit card, and then we created a budget that actually has a timeline built into it. So it's, and partly because a lot of us probably use online bill pay for most of bills now. We don't have the old-fashioned like write checks on the 15th or whatever. So we created, one of my points of confusion before we really got on the same page was I had no idea what the timing was for the automatic payments that Tim had set up. So I didn't know when money was going in or out, just that we were covering it. And so we created this budget that actually the first part of it is laid out 1 to 31. So it's the days of each month, and we do one unique to each month. And then we show, okay, house payment comes out on the 4th, whatever the bills are that are predictable. So all of our predictable expenses are sort of our fixed, and then anything that's left over after we add up our income and subtract those fixed ones as our sort of discretionary that we track in a different way. And it's made it, for us at least, it's brought clarity to that situation.
So I'll echo what Josh said in saying that sometimes there's like a baseline set of expenses that I have every month that I've tracked and understand what that's going to be, but then I have variable spending every month that varies wildly. So trips here, or car repairs, or purchasing some new snowboard boots or some sort of equipment for that. So what I ended up doing is just spending a lot of time manually looking at my finances, putting them in a spreadsheet, stuff like that. And I've tried different apps to try to figure out, like, Mint or some other apps that as you spend something, you put a line item in there. And that works great for 3-4 weeks, but then I run out of steam and just get busy with life and end up not kind of following through with it. And ultimately, my finances aren't terrible. So there's kind of not a huge motivator there. It's like, my finances are fine, I don't have a zero budget, but I kind of have an idea of where my expenses are. So just having something that would be easy would be, not take a huge time investment is kind of where my huge struggle with is. And then not having an idea of like what apps and websites and spreadsheets or whatever are out there. So I've tried different things. I've gone through the Dave Ramsey program, for example. And just everything that I've dealt with just seems very cumbersome and a lot of added time that feels unnecessary sometimes. So, for my personality type.
And one of the big comments that Tim made as we were wrestling through this whole thing a couple years ago was, he's like, look, I don't want to have to recategorize stuff on a website. I don't want to have to save a big basket of receipts and go through receipts at the end of the month. Like, we don't have time for this. And so, miraculously, he came up with a central Google. Seriously, it's a total miracle. Not kidding you. Because one, he came up with it, and two, it meant that he was completely bought in on it. I'm like, what? So it's this central Google spreadsheet that we have like a link on our phones, and we enter each purchase like as we make it, which is part of your problem.
Yeah.
But it takes 1 second, and it goes to the central worksheet, and it categorizes it for us, and then we can look at it at the end of the month, and we can throw away our receipt and forget about it, and we don't have to recategorize and figure out, like, why did it put it here? So for us, it's worked, but it was, and it's free, which is another plus. But
do you feel like you have to have, like, to be, I don't know, financially responsible? Do you think you have to have a zero budget? And
yes.
Like, do you see people being successful outside of that? I mean, and maybe that's just my personality type, but I feel, I don't know, burdensome sometimes.
I think part of it, so going back to what are you using for your criteria to purchase something, I guess. So like if you're going to buy those snowboard boots, is it, can I afford them and do I want them? And if those are the only questions that you're asking, I think that's a bigger indicator of your heart and like how are you stewarding finances, because there is always an opportunity cost, because that means you're not doing something else. And so to kind of go off that question, one thing, so we use different budgeting systems. We're both very intentional about how we do that, but I use a system, it's based on a system called the First Step Cash Flow Management System. But I've taught the class, I hope, a few times. It's the one that Becca and I use. A number of my clients use it, but it basically breaks expenses down into past, present, and future expenses. So past are all those that Jessica talked about that automatically come out every month. So I like to say, if you just stayed at home and didn't do anything, you're going to pay all these things. So that's your rent or your mortgage, any tithing or regular giving that you're doing that's coming automatically out of your accounts, your utilities, loan payments, cell phone, gym membership, Netflix, all those things that come out every single month. Then present is those things that you're really focused on that are about the same every month. So things like groceries or shopping or gas or eating out, where you're actually budgeting for those things and you want to stay within a certain range every month. And most people just focus on those two categories, past and present, when you're doing budgeting, but then you've got that suit that comes up for your friend's wedding, and then it's like, well, where does that come from? And so that's where future expenses would come from. And so what we do, we actually have a separate savings account for each of those future expenses that we might have. And we say, how much per year might we spend on vacation? So that's like an irregular one. And so we have let's just say we're going to say we're going to spend $1,200 a year on vacations. And so we have $100 that automatically gets transferred to the separate savings account titled vacations. So we very clearly see anytime we go on a vacation, it can come out of that account, and then that's where that money comes from. And so we have like 12 different future accounts that's things like vacation or spontaneous giving or next vehicle or gifts that we're giving, car repairs, home improvement. So those are all different categories we have there. And so for us, it's really helpful because then we have to talk to each other and figure out, okay, this is the vacation. Do we have this money in our vacation account or not? And so it's a way to kind of make these annual or irregular expenses a monthly expense because money automatically gets transferred to that. So you might just have one for like special occasions or something, and that's where you have money going in. And then if it's a suit for a wedding, or if it's a birthday, or a gift, or whatever it is that you want to give to, it can always come from that account.
So track that over time enough where you can categorize how you spend money, be able to then figure out how much money you need for that, and then kind of proactively plan.
Yeah, and you can change those too. And then the thing that I would say is, like, the example I give, let's say there's a vacation and it's going to cost $2,000, like the best vacation ever, I really want to do it. I've only got $1,000 in my vacation account. So now you have to be intentional and say, I only have a finite amount of money. I'm going to take this from one of my other future categories. So I have to take this from my next car account. I'm willing to wait an extra 6 months or a year, or I'm willing to buy a cheaper car to go on this vacation. But you're making that decision then because you only have so much money that's available. So it's really clear. It's not just one big pot of money that you're taking from. A couple questions. Yeah, I saw your hand first.
I think I just have one comment for you. I think try it if you want, but like one thing app that's been really fun for me to use is called Digit. Yeah,
Fun.
Yeah, super fun. Yeah, because you're not even thinking about it, and it takes micro amounts of money out of your bank account and just saves it for you.
Is that where it like rounds up? Like you spend $9.54 and it rounds up?
Acorns, I think. Digit just randomly.
It just randomly
steals money.
When it's like it's your account.
For sure.
It's your account.
Well, so that's savings versus budget.
But then on the other side of it, if it's like if it's an account like that he's talking about the future that you want to make, you can like say, I want this to go to like my snowboard fund or whatever, and you just send that withdrawal to that account, and then you'll have like a whole bunch of line items of like, oh, this is how much you have in your like future car fund or something like that, and it's just all like text. So that's one thing that I use that's pretty cool because like if I don't want to think about saving, it just happens already. So
I like that. Thanks.
Well, we should, I know, sorry, hold on one second. We should also back up to and just say that there's a whole discussion to have with a spouse if you're married, or somebody that you feel can like hold you accountable to this area, right? And that's around like values and how to start with before you even like dig into this. Maybe you track your spending and you kind of see like, gosh, I didn't realize I was spending that much on this, or whatever. And I think you really got to pause and spend some time on like, okay, what are my values that are gonna underlie this entire budget? And maybe it's something as simple as like I want to focus on my giving, but maybe it's something like I need to kill debt in my life and get these loans out of here, right? Or whatever it might be. And so I think there's two big components to this. One is like the tangible, mechanical. How am I going to track this? What's the system I'm going to use? The other is like, how are my values going to inform that system? And how am I going to make sure I'm interacting with my values each time I dig into the system. Does that make sense? So it's kind of a both and.
For sure.
So I've got more of a comment than anything. That's the system I was talking about. I mean,
got it.
That's the one I was talking about.
Okay.
And it's been very effective, and it took a lot of work to get set up because the first couple months unless you manage to front load with some of the money.
Yeah.
The first couple months is really shaky, and you're kind of riding the edge as those accounts get built up to the point where they can start absorbing those random things.
Yeah.
And so it takes some time to set up what my wife will do. And I will do.
Great, thanks. Just one extra question. So you guys mentioned you guys help people, and maybe I have more questions that I won't bother soaking up the rest of the group's time. But I never even heard of that as an option. Is there something on the city that you guys post about, or is there?
Yeah. Well, it's on the communication card, which we don't hand out anymore. It's on, if you go and fill out the communication card online, one of the items is financial sort of
Financial stewardship.
But don't we actually ask a question like, can I talk with somebody about finances? I thought we changed. Anyway, we'll look at it one.
Sure.
But yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And
Justin,
there is a city
Justin and Ben
group.
can maybe post something on the city for our group, and maybe that can be a point of contact for you guys.
And there is a city group for financial stewardship too.
We had a couple back here. Quick.
So I had a question, and I think you might have partially answered it. Before we got married, we talked to a whole bunch of couples that we know about like how they do their finances, and we settled upon having like several different savings accounts for different things, and also having several different checking accounts. So we have one that's like specifically car, so that's like the gas money. So every time at the pump, we just pay with that card, and then that one's also slowly accruing money, so that we have card or have to get a replacement card in the future comes out of that. The part that I think is a struggle for me is that when we have something like car insurance that you pay twice a year, or even just like money for Christmas presents, those things that they're built, you should build it into your 12-month plan so that you're putting, 1/12 of it into that pot, every month.
Yep.
Is there a good way to track that or like do that without having like 10 or 12 different accounts? You know what I mean? All these.
Yeah.
Because I was like having three checking accounts, 3 savings accounts already feels like a lot.
Yeah.
And like definitely when we set it up at the credit union, they were very confused.
Yeah. It's a couple of great resources. So I do think separate savings accounts, if you go to, Capital One 360 or Ally Bank are great online savings accounts. They're FDIC insured. They pay like interest of 1.5%. You can set up to 25 different savings accounts. You can label them exactly what you want. It's very easy to do with either of them. It doesn't take that much time once you have the first account set up.
Okay.
And so I do think that you log in and you see all of them in one place. It's very easy to do. So I do think that that's probably the best way to do
What
that.
were those called again?
Capital One 360. It's and one is spelled out ONE. And then 360 is the digits 360. And then Ally Bank ALLY.
And my comment would be that we don't do that. We just have a big lump sum account, but we track it on paper.
Okay.
So I think you can do it that way, but it's not as sort of,
There's more tracking
set aside.
involved.
Yeah, right.
Were you gonna ask a question, Steve?
Yeah, I was just wondering when you got rid of your credit cards and your points. We like our points.
I know.
So I was just like wondering if you felt like you were running into an issue with your credit card. Or what was the big reason you chose? Because we don't pay any interest in ours at all either.
Yep.
And then we get points. So
there's actually 3 reasons. One was we were always a month behind, right? So we were a month behind in our spending, right? Or we had spent ahead a month because everything was on credit card and we weren't paying it till the next month. So we were using our August income to pay for stuff that we bought in July, if that makes sense, instead of paying for stuff in August with our August income. So we couldn't look at our bank account and align it with our spending as easily for us. 2, I was convinced by Dave Ramsey's argument that points will never make you rich. Like, points at the end of the day aren't going to have a material effect on your overall budget or your overall financial condition. So, at the end of the day, it wasn't that hard for us to give up. And then I have a 3rd one, but I forgot it. I'll think about it.
I mean, I have one comment on that too. Just the reason why you might not want to use a credit card is because where is that 1.5–2% coming from of your points and
other people's interest?
Yeah, other people's interest, and those are the people that are having financial troubles, and
that's true.
You're kind of benefiting from that in a way.
Yeah. So the social cost of the credit card system in general. Yeah. See that.
Brian, do you want to say?
Well, my one thought, and I don't know if there's a simple way to solve it, but like Target and Amazon are really my toughest places because I have different plans for like gifting and clothes and food and all this stuff, and it's I spend on probably 12 different categories. And so it's really hard to, like, later on, even if I do it weekly, to remember, like, oh, I spent, you know, $10 here, $5 here, $7 here. And it's frustrating since I really do want to be intentional with, like, the different categories. And so part of me is like, should I just have, like, a Target and Amazon? Like, particularly with Target, because Amazon I can see my orders, so it's a little easier. But anyways, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
So the way that Tim does it, so Tim actually does all of our shopping and buys all our kids' clothes and everything. I mean, he really does all that stuff. And the way that he has done that is he checks out twice at Target. So he'll put all the food at the beginning and check out, and then put all, like, the home goods, which is our discretionary category for, like, Target and whatever. He'll check out twice.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how do you fight, you know, using a budget, how do you fight against it becoming legalistic, or now I have a budget, so now I've found my security in my budget. You know, like, it seems like there's some tension in that. So I guess I'm getting at the applicant, like, it's one thing to do the budget and get it down on a piece of paper, but then it's a whole nother thing to actually live life, you know, with your budget and apply it and use it, and how do you, how does that play out? Coming from a guy who I'll confess, we don't have them. We know where our money's, we don't, you know, whatever, I'm not gonna go into that, but we don't have them. So.
Just, Brian, I was thinking the same as well. I'll be honest, a time of struggle with my wife and I, when we're coming out of medical school and so I had a fair bit of debt, etc., was going through budget analysis of a sequence of time of 6 months. We had a question of when does this lead to, at what point does budgeting and his monthly budget and fact-checking all these things, when does it turn into worship and intimacy between us as a couple, but us, our relationship with God? So just wondering, just like from a health standpoint, where our body's supposed to be a temple of the Holy Spirit, we can do calorie counting, running, checking a ton, but at a certain point, if you have a framework set up, and I can give the running end point is that I think we got to a point where we did it for a season, took some time off the analysis at some regard, but then coming back to it in this season, it may not be the weekly or monthly that we're looking for. Just I'm reflecting off of that. So that came to a point where we were able to worship and have intimacy, and not at a point we had to come to the number crunching as well. So I'd love to have your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I can tell you my experience, because I think my and Tim's experiences in it is a good illustration of both types of personalities, because we are really polar opposite on how we view and engage with and are interested in money, right? So for me, the temptation could be, and is at times, for me to make that structure and that having a budget be like the thing, right? So that's my inclination. Tim's inclination is to, like, ignore, right? Just ignore, just spend, it's fine. And so for us, and this is just our experience with it, but there was it was hard at first, right? We went through, why are we doing this? What are our values? It took a lot of time and effort in the beginning for us to set it up. I would say we spent a few hours putting the whole system that was going to work for us together. But since that time, like, we have one night a month that we are really intentional about sitting down together, and it usually takes less than a half hour. So it's not super time consuming, but we'll usually sit down together and it'll be time for us to pray about our finances, which we want to be doing regularly. We don't do, confessing, we don't do it any other time of the month. Really sit down together and pray about our finances. And then it's a time for us to regularly reevaluate our priorities, and knowing that along with that, we're going to have the information that's helpful to bring light to what that looks like in our financial situation. So for us, I feel like it used to be something that he would dread, and I would be like, why aren't we doing this more? Now that we have something that we set up as a regular, it's almost like a regular, we meet regularly once a week to worship corporately. It's not the only way to sort of engage with, worshiping God, right? And so you do it in all these different ways, and this is, for us, has become the regular habit of it has become really healthy. So that's just our experience, but yeah.
I mean, I would just say it is attention, like we talked about. Like it's not, it's not you get a budget in place and you're all good. Like you need to keep these other biblical principles in mind, I think. And I think, I would say though also just with clients that I've worked with though, I find that those who are more closely aware of where their money is going, they tend to give more because they're almost always, once you get a budget set up, you probably are going to spend less because you're more intentional and your money's just not drifting away that you didn't even realize was drifting away maybe. So you're able to be more intentional and increase giving. I mean, one thing that we do, I talked about the past, present, and future. We have a past category that's like all the regular giving that we're doing. So giving to Hope, giving to some different missionaries, organizations, but then we also have a future category. We call it just a separate savings account called spontaneous giving, where we have money goes into that, every month as well. And so that's now where we're, choosing to allocate that money. And I would say, typically we stick to that for extra giving, but I think following these principles, like that's probably becoming too legalistic and saying, okay, we're doing our spontaneous giving, so we're good there. It's like, well, where is there room for even more? And then we start to give some of our vacation fund, or we give some of our next car account. I mean, there's always, more that can be given, I guess. But I think for us, there's a tension there, I would say. But I think it's still a worthy practice of having it for most people, I would say.
I think it's easy for me to recognize when I'm being legalistic with money when I obey the budget rather than when I obey God. Like what the Bible lays out. Like if the Holy Spirit is saying like, this would be a great thing for you to give to, and I'm like, it's a little above my percentage that I decided to give this period or whatever, then it's like, this is where I start to feel a heart issue with God. It might lead to sin or it might lead to obedience. Like, there's an opportunity available for me. So the budget that you have is a broken version of how you're supposed to steward money, but hopefully there's been wisdom built into that budget. And you're supposed to integrate wisdom into that. But it's not the Bible, it's not God. So yeah.
So we're like almost out of time.
We should keep going. Okay, so do you want to go to the next one? Okay, so that's budgeting, and by the way,
really hard stop at 8:30. Like we should be.
No, you're good. Go to 8:45.
Okay.
It's a minute of madness and tell me.
Okay, so I put this slide in here because I think it's really important. I mean, budgeting is absolutely, in my mind, absolutely one of those things that all of us are going to interact with regular spending and regular giving and all that stuff. But there's other topics in personal finance that I think are really important for us to approach again with curiosity and interest and not fear. And these are sort of some additional advanced areas that I think it's helpful just to think like, what am I going to do with this, right? So if I sit down at a new job and they hand me a big packet of documents that has, a retirement plan, and I'm electing health insurance, and I got to put a beneficiary on this stuff, and what's my beneficiary going to be? I'll just tell you right now, I work with a lot of different families, many of whom have really complex balance sheets and are accomplished people, whatever, and successful in different careers. I have not found a single person yet who has all of the loose ends buttoned up, who has an estate plan that's up to date, who has all of this stuff figured out. So I think all of us can benefit from a regular sort of well check, and maybe a lot of us will go get a physical, right, once a year or something. This kind of stuff is really important, I think, to review now and again, because you're going to be super surprised that this stuff will just happen regardless of whether you're intentional about it. And a lot of times people will wake up one day and think like, gosh, how did that happen? My experience was that when I was a freshman in college, my dad died suddenly. And I'm the oldest child, and so I was obviously got engaged with my mom on figuring out what was going on. And she asked me, it happened in January, and she asked me to come home over spring break of that year and to go with her to the lawyer and the banker and the accountant. And I was like this, good student, smart kid. But I went to all these different meetings, and it was the Charlie Brown voice. It was like the wah 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 wah. Like, what? They're speaking English. I have no idea what they're saying. And so personally, that's kind of what drove me into understanding this stuff. But I remember sitting there and realizing, like, okay, Dad didn't have life insurance, and you guys are seriously in debt. And how are you going to survive, Mom? You make less than a third of what Dad made. Like, this is going to be really hard. And maybe all of a sudden, like, I'm going to be responsible for caring for my mom in the future. And like, whoa, right? Whoa. So unexpected things happen, and so I don't just say this from like a estate planning standpoint, but insurance, like, unexpected things happen, and people get sick, and if you have dependents and you have people relying on you for your income, it's really important to look at this stuff with somebody that you trust, that knows what they're talking about. And I think that's an area that Ben and I are particularly passionate about, is making sure that people can find a resource, cut through a lot of the gobbledygook that comes with this whole financial thing, and find somebody that you trust, that you can speak plain English with, or that can speak plain English to you and help you to navigate things related to these areas. So that's my impassioned plea for all of you to take some time with this and to care about it. So, question? There are resources. We've talked about Financial Peace University. That class does go through each of these areas. Total disclaimer, Ben and I are mostly aligned with the perspective that Dave gives in that class. There are certain things that Ben and I would differ from Dave on, and that's okay. But at the end of the day, it's important to find a resource that you can, I think, navigate. Yeah.
Do you want to? I have a question, but if you got more material to get through, I can.
What do we? We do have.
We're going through this small group, but we should do the giving. So.
Okay, so hold that question. So then the other thing that we want to talk about is giving. Do you want to speak to this first, or do you want me to run through it?
Yeah, I can do it.
Okay.
So yeah, first of all, we talked about the generosity matrix. That's the 6 principles that we talked about. So that's just a good, keep those things in tension. Like, it's easy to go too far to one end or the other, and really just keeping them in tension, praying through those. The next one is giving generously. Considering a graduated tithe. So this is something I first heard, I'm sure other people do it too, but I read it, and it was an article on the Gospel Coalition where John Piper he was actually talking specifically about pastors' pay, and just like the risks of pastors pursuing wealth, and like, why would a pastor ever want to pursue wealth with all the warnings, in Scripture and what it could do to their heart. And so this was a quote from him that I thought was helpful. He said, "I believed from the beginning that plan should be to put a governor on laying up treasures on earth. Otherwise, little by little, I might assume that my wants were my needs, and the expenses would expand, as they always do, to fill the income. So Noelle and I put in place a graduated tithe from the beginning. That is, we tried to give a greater percentage with each salary increase, not just a greater amount." And so that would mean that if you're giving, let's say you're giving 10% right now and you get a pay increase, you keep giving 10%, your amount is going up, but your percentage is staying the same. But he's saying, I'm going to go to 11% if I get, a pay raise, because I can still live, I can probably increase my standard of living even based on that, but just always doing that so that you're not letting your wants become your needs, or you start to think about them that way. And one other just point I want to say in that too is, we haven't talked a lot about debt, but if we're really wanting to follow God with our finances, and we look around at the world, people who are making similar amount of money to us, we probably should be living at a lower lifestyle than they are. And a couple of reasons for that. One is we haven't talked a lot about debt, but if we're gonna, aim to pay for things with cash and not take on debt when we buy vehicles, when we buy a television, when we buy, most things that, again, that's a whole other discussion, debt. But I would say in general, trying to pay cash for things, most of the world doesn't do that. Most of the world finances most of the purchases, like the video that we were watching earlier alluded to. So that's one thing. I mean, that might cut our standard of living by 10%, just if we're always paying ahead for things or paying cash. And then secondly, if we're giving radically, an average person gives about 1% in the US. And so if we're giving 10%, 15%, 20% of our income, we should expect, like, change your mindset, I guess, right now. Of like, if I'm working with my peers who are making the same amount, my lifestyle probably is going to look less. And if we can go in with that expectation, I think we're setting ourselves up where we're not feeling disappointed, but it's like we get to do these things, we get to live differently. And part of that is just this, radical giving that we have the opportunity to do when God has really changed our hearts. So that's just, somebody explained that to me, and it really, set with me. Like, if you go in with that expectation, you should expect that then, and not be surprised when you can't do the same things as buy as big of a house or as nice
Because
a
we
car.
are constantly drawn to that comparison,
Yeah.
I think. I think it's a regular temptation for working people.
Yeah. And then the last thing, just considering an income net worth cap. So I mentioned this earlier, but just carefully determine if there's an income or net worth for you and your family that is reasonable, and give everything you earn above this. And so one example might be saying, for our family, we can live on $50,000 a year, and anything that we earn above that, we're just going to give away because we've decided we can live on that amount. And this can very easily go into legalism, where, okay, this is what we're doing, we're in a good place because we're not spending more than that. But I think also to think through something like that is, what is the amount that actually God is calling our family to live on? What is the comfortable amount? Because you potentially can give away a bunch of money. So that's the income cap. And then a net worth is just saying, like, kind of talking about that earlier, saving for retirement. It's really easy for me to want to do that and feel good about that. But saying, what is the amount that, okay, I don't need to save more than this, and actually determining what is that number. And then once I've hit that number, why am I still saving for retirement? Because I'm saving for something that is not actually a goal, and now I can start to give everything above that number. So it takes a little more intention for these types of things, but just wanted to put them out there as like a giving strategy, because I think it's worth just considering, thinking about finances different than the world does. When we're following Jesus, we don't want to just do what everybody else does and kind of take the next step, and now I'm going to buy a car, now I'm going to buy a house, and now I'm going to, send my kids to college. But what would it look like to give radically, as, again, Jesus is our example, that second principle that we looked at. Jesus radically was giving of his self, and we should be radically giving of ourselves and our resources. Anything you want to add to?
Well, we have some questions for follow-up discussion that center in a little bit more on the giving. And one of the questions that you can maybe be thinking about even now as we come away from this class is not just the how much to give, but also the where to give. I think that's a really challenging thing for people, because you may have a portion that you want to give as part of a member of a church, and that's great, but I don't think in the Christian community we talk a lot about how do we make choices about where dollars go above and beyond that. And so we've got some questions for you in the follow-up discussions on thinking through that a little bit more too.
Yeah. So we're not going to do this right now. This is our small group discussion. These are just a couple other resources. So one, as Jessica mentioned, we teach some other classes. So Financial Peace University, we're planning to probably do in the fall again. Usually about once a year we do that, and then we do a number of other classes as well. If there's specific topics that you guys would like to hear on, our classes, we've been struggling to get people to come to them. It seemed like the attendance has been down some. So if there are any specific topics that it's like, hey, this would be a great topic that we want to learn more about, let us know, and maybe we'll offer something like that. These are just a couple of books. I think they're great resources. Randy Alcorn is a pastor and author. One is called Money, Possessions, and Eternity. That's a longer one that really has got some great stuff in it, really challenged me a lot. The other one, Treasure Principle, is specifically on giving. It's a shorter read, but he just talks about like a biblical view of giving. I think that's a good one. This is not a Christian resource, but it's a newer, so only on Facebook you can see it, but 2 cents PBS. There's actually a couple financial planners that I know through a group I'm a part of who have started doing these, but they're like awesome. It's crazy. They just started at the beginning of this year, and some of their videos already have like multiple million views, and they're just like talking about plain English, like financial terms. They're just excellent. They're from an objective standpoint. They're not trying to sell anything. So if you're just wanting some financial education, that's a great resource to go to and just watch. They're fun too. They're actually, before they were financial planners, they were both in like theater and acting and stuff like that. So they're like really like high budget short videos. They're great.
We mentioned a bunch of other resources, and we'll make sure to get a list of those together for you guys. And then this PowerPoint too, with the slides and the verses that we skipped past, can be available too. We'll make sure that Benji has a copy of the up-to-date one.
So we should probably
so
wrap up.
That's it. But you had a question that I wanted to circle back to.
We have about 3-4 minutes of questions you can take.
Okay.
Okay.
With respect to debt, I know that I think I'm under the impression that Dave Ramsey is not a huge fan of debt. But I'm wondering about the idea of, I think there's a legitimate argument for making debt a resource and leveraging leverage. And I just want to, recently I had a Home Depot bill that I needed stuff I needed to buy, and they offer discount or no financing for 18 months for $5,000. Like, well, I don't see what the problem is. I mean, that seems very shrewd and great. Like, I got $5,000, but I'll let it sit in one of those Capital One accounts for $1.5 and then pay it off in 1.5 years. What's wrong with that?
I'd say a couple things. So first of all, I would say that there is a place for debt. You look at our church. Like, we took on debt to finance the building and be able to remodel that and purchase the building, Hope East. I am not saying there's not a place for debt. I think the risk with something like that is, are you buying more than you would have had you not used it? If you're really disciplined and you're using that exact example, yeah, you should use the 0% financing and have it sitting in a Capital One 360 or an Ally Bank earning 1.5%. You're maximizing what you can have. But I think that especially like when you look at cars are the biggest thing. Like, I think that when you're using debt to buy it, you almost are always going to buy more car than you really need or would have if you would have saved up and paid cash for it. Like, I just think that from a behavioral standpoint, that's a true, statement. Even if you can get 0% financing on it, like, you're probably going to overextend yourself. And if you can do it without doing that, then I don't think there is a problem. But I think that for almost everybody, there's a behavioral component of that you're just going to buy more than you really need by using debt. So that's the biggest thing. And I would also say, if you're not saving up for it, you're just exposing yourself to risk, because things are good now and you can afford to make those payments. But, what if something changes? Or even if, let's say there's a missionary who needs money or something like that, or somebody in your small group who's in financial trouble. If you have this car payment, you can't even have the choice to help them because you have this past obligation. Or if you've paid cash for that vehicle or for that, Home Depot thing, you have the money now sitting there where you say, yeah, I can help you if you feel like that's what God is calling you to. So it just provides flexibility for you. You're probably going to spend less in general, but I'm not saying there's never a place for debt, either.
My view would be twofold. One, I think there is an amazing freedom to not having debt and not owing anybody money. I just think there's a freedom to that spiritually, and I think Tim and I have felt that as we've cleared the decks on our student loans and other things. It's just been like, oh, this is freeing in a way that we didn't expect. The other thing is, I personally feel like I'm in a life stage where I have way too much to do, and with kids and work and everything, I get why people like to kind of figure out the system and like get an edge somewhere. I just am like, I don't have time. I just don't have time for that. And I don't think the reward that you get at the end of the day is gonna make or break or change your financial situation all that much. That's just my personal viewpoint, but I also understand why people are like, oh, I could earn this much on this over here and take a loan for less over here, so I'm gonna get the spread, arbitrage, all that stuff, great. Fine, if you're super into that and you want to spend time and effort and it's interesting to you, great. I just don't think that that's going to be the number one way people over time build wealth.
Bitcoin.
Drops the bomb.
Okay, that's a really interesting thing about Bitcoin and any commodities you might choose to buy. I'm serious. I'm actually going to go into this. So if you buy commodities or currency, the thing is that there's not an income engine behind it. You're speculating on the value, the relative value of a fixed basket of goods, whether that's currency or corn or cows or whatever it is, and you're essentially betting that the price will go up or down, but there's no underlying income engine behind it like you would if you bought stock in a company that's earning revenue and has a business plan. So my personal view would be stay away from currency speculation and commodities because it's just betting.
So Bitcoin has gone up by 24% since the start of this year.
It
Not
has,
since
but
December though.
Yeah. It's incredibly volatile.
Yeah, it's a
and
currency.
risky.
It's a currency.
If you want to go to Vegas with Bitcoin and different commodity things, that's what you're doing.
Yeah, it's a currency.
Yeah.
All right, I'm just going to pray for wrap this up and turn it over to Julie. Father, we just thank you for this time that we've had here tonight. Money can be a topic that can be difficult. A lot of emotions can come up, either just guilt of not using it in the way that maybe we would have wanted to, or just, having it be something that either we're looking to provide security for us or meaning for us, Lord. I just pray that the things that we've learned tonight, that we've talked about tonight, that we would look to the Bible as our guide for how we manage our finances, just like how we live every part of our lives, Lord. But I also pray that we would just seek out wisdom from just friends and family members, from other resources that are out there to help us as we are just stewarding the resources that you have entrusted to us, Lord. I pray that as we're managing our money, that we would just fall even more in love with you and just worship you because of what you've given to us and because of what we're able to do for your kingdom and to just further your gospel on this earth because of the resources that you've given to us. Father, I pray that you just go ahead of us tonight and just thank you for this group of off-roaders and for the commitment they've made just to learning and growing as leaders. We pray these things in your name. Amen.